this question, if you plug in infinity, it's not a basic limit law, and so what we have to do is we have to try to convert it into a basic limit law. Now, to do that, we identify the highest power in the denominator. Now, in this case, the highest power in the denominator is this x squared, but it's underneath the square root. So that means that our highest power that we're supposed to divide by is going to be the square root of x squared. Now, it's fine and dandy to say that we're dividing by the square root of x squared when we have a square root. But in the numerator here, we just have 3x, and that is not underneath the radical. So if you kind of think about, like, if you had to simplify 3x over the square root of x squared, how does that simplify? So in order to deal with the square root of x squared, we're actually going to have to deal with how it is defined piecewise. And piecewise, it's defined as negative x if x is less than 0, and positive x if x is greater than or equal to 0. Now, in this case, what we are doing is we are going towards positive infinity. So because we're going towards positive infinity, we're not going to be interested when x is less than 0. We are going to use piece 2, which is going to be x. So because our x is going towards positive infinity, we have x greater than or equal to 0. So we will divide by x when we are not inside of the square root. And if we are inside of the square root, we can divide by x squared. So it's either going to be x if we are outside of the square root. And if we're inside the square root, then it's appropriate to divide by square root of x squared. Okay, so that's where we're going with this. Let's see where it leads us. So our first step is we're going to divide by the highest power in the denominator. So here we have 3x, that is outside of the square root. So we use the definition of square root of x squared that is relevant when it's outside of the square root, which is x, over square root of x squared. Now because we're inside of the square root, it's appropriate to divide by x squared. And then plus 1 over, we're inside the square root, so we're going to use our inside the square root definition, which is going to be x squared. So that is the trickiest part, and now we've just got to simplify it. So we'll notice that these x's cross out, and the same thing goes, this x squared over x squared crosses out as well. So simplifying leaves us with the limit as x goes to positive infinity of 3 over the square root of 1 plus 1 over x squared. Now, our usual step after we simplify is to use our basic limit laws. And so we can use those basic limits. And so here we see that we have an x squared in the denominator. As x goes to infinity, this will go to 0. So our basic limit law is going to tell us that we're left with the limit as x goes to infinity of 3 over the square root of 1, which is, of course, just 3. Okay, so that question is a little tricky because you're dealing with the square root of x squared, and in order to deal with that when it's outside of the radical, you have to deal with the piecewise function.